Time usually marches in a straight, obedient line, 1 second neatly following the next. But every so often, a fracture appears, a seam, a door hiding inside an ordinary moment. Step through, and memory echoes forward, greeting moments that haven't yet arrived. The future loops back to meet you, and the familiar becomes just slightly, unmistakably wrong. Welcome, traveler, to the door between 2 seconds. Step carefully. The moment you entered is already behind you. Episode 7. The second that wouldn't end. 2 days after the building stalled on 10/17, Idris Vale woke to the sound of his bedside clock apologizing. "I'm sorry," it said, in the clipped mechanical stutter of a plastic device not designed for remorse. He rolled over and squinted at it. The digital numbers wavered. 6:04, then 6:04 again, and again. He rubbed his eyes. "We're doing this now." The seconds weren't advancing. The colon between the numbers blinked with anxious urgency, as if trying to move things along, but the digits refused to cooperate. Idris sat up and watched it for a full minute that did not technically happen. "Right," he said. So it wasn't a one-off. He swung his legs out of bed and stood, feeling the air around him for that same strange thickness. It was there, less intense than at the office, but present. Like gravity was fine, but cause and effect had called in sick. In the kitchen, the kettle began to boil before he turned on the stove. Steam poured out of the spout in a way that suggested it was ahead of schedule. He turned the dial as a courtesy anyway. The steam rose in a simple vertical line, then twisted midair and formed a familiar shape, an imperfect circle with a crack. "Not subtle," Idris muttered. The cracked circle symbol dissipated as quickly as it formed, but the point was made. He poured water over tea leaves and watched the liquid swirl, the surface settling into a perfect stillness that held just a fraction too long. Time was hiccuping around him. He dressed, pocketed the blank page he still hadn't dared to write on, and stepped into the hallway of his apartment building, half expecting it to be frozen in tableau. Instead, it was worse. Everything was almost normal. The elderly woman in 3B shuffled toward the elevator as she did every morning at 7:12, carrying a reusable shopping bag with a picture of a smiling tomato. But today she moved in slight jerks, like someone repeatedly hitting pause on an invisible remote. Her keys fell from her hand, then jumped back into it without touching the ground. Her lips pursed, unpursed, pursed again, mid-sigh. Idris approached. "Morning, Mrs. Haynes." She looked up, and in the space of that look, her expression flickered through 3 different reactions before settling on polite recognition. "Oh, Mr. Vale," she said, voice echoing a fraction behind her words. "You caught me leaving, I suppose." "You all right?" he asked carefully. She frowned thoughtfully, as if the question had to travel through a few extra seconds before arriving. "I was," she said slowly, "and I will be. I can't recall about now." He nodded like that made sense, because he was working on a theory that the universe appreciated it when people didn't panic right away. He took the stairs instead of the elevator. Elevators and temporal anomalies did not mix. Outside, the city was bright and indifferent. Commuters moved along sidewalks, phones out, eyes down, each inhabiting their own narrow corridor of attention. If Idris hadn't been paying attention, he might have missed the anomalies. A bird flapped its wings once and hung midair for a beat too long before continuing. A bus rolled through an intersection, but its wheels skipped a rotation, skidding across uncounted moments. A child tossed a ball that curved along an impossible arc, as if consulting future wind patterns. Time wasn't broken, it was misaligned. By the time he reached his building, the 39-floor obelisk of bureaucracy, his teeth were clenched. The sliding glass door stuttered open in 3 microframes like a buffering video. The lobby clock read 8:03, understood the expectation for 8:04, then compromised at hovering awkwardly in between. The receptionist greeted him twice. "Morning, Mr. Vale, morning, Mr. Vale." He waved the second greeting away. "Don't worry," he said. "I think it's me." She blinked and blinked again. One of the blinks stretched slightly longer than the other. He headed toward the elevators and hesitated. The last time he'd stepped into one, it had behaved itself. Today, the call button pulsed before he touched it. The doors slid open, revealing an empty car. Elevator music played, but the notes came out in the wrong order, rearranging themselves into a melody that almost resolved and then refused to. "Fine," Idris told it. "Let's see how committed you are." He stepped in. The doors closed with the slow deliberation of someone signing a contract they hadn't fully read. He pressed 39. The elevator thought about it. Then, instead of ascending, it hummed a tone Idris had only heard once before, in training, in diagrams describing what it sounded like when time localized itself. "Destination," said a voice from the ceiling speaker. "Redefined." "Redefined to what?" Idris asked. "Nonlinear," the elevator replied, and began to move. It didn't go up or down in any useful sense. The floor vibrated, but it felt more like shifting channels on a television than physically traveling. The indicator above the door flickered through numbers that did not exist in the building's layout. 2, 13, 1, 2, 0.0, 39, 39, 39. Then it stopped. The doors opened. The 39th floor was gone. In its place was a corridor made entirely of translucent clock faces, stacked and interlocked, forming walls, floor, and ceiling. Each clock displayed a different time, some seconds apart, some years, some labeled with dates Idris knew had not happened yet. He stepped out. The air was cool and dry, smelling faintly of dust and electric storms. His footsteps made no sound, but the second hands of the clocks ticked louder with each move he made, as if reacting to his presence. Sitting halfway down the corridor, legs pulled to its chest, was a figure made of shimmering static. It was small, childlike in shape, but its outline flickered through ages, sometimes ancient, sometimes newborn. "Idris Vale," it said, voice echoing slightly behind itself. "You're late." "You're a second," he said. "You don't get to talk about late." "I am the second," it corrected. "The one you touched. The one you nudged into significance." He approached, careful not to brush against the clocks. Up close, the figure had eyes, though they were not located anywhere specific. They were simply the sensation of being watched. "Why is everything stuttering?" he asked. "Because I cannot settle," the second said. "You made a choice. Then you stood on it as if it were a suggestion." Idris frowned. "I made a choice," he said. "I agreed to move forward." "You agreed," the second said, head tilting, "the way a person agrees to exercise starting Monday. You touched the moment. You did not inhabit it. Now the timelines are confused." One of the clocks to Idris's right cracked, a hairline fracture running across its face. Inside, he glimpsed something impossible, himself walking down a street he'd never visited, under a sky that did not match anything in the forecast. "What do you want from me?" Idris asked, quieter. The second stood, static, shifting. "Resolution. You've been charting futures for everyone but yourself. The universe permitted that. It was cute." Idris bristled. "Cute?" "You were making maps," the second said. "Little lines, arrows, clinical phrases. You thought that made you safe from your own roots." A clock shattered behind it, releasing a cascade of images. Idris in an unfamiliar office, Idris speaking on a stage, Idris holding a hand he'd never reached for. "Humans break when they stack too many maybes," the second continued. "Reality breaks when one of those humans has access to the mapping field." Idris swallowed. The blank page in his pocket felt heavier. "Why does it matter so much?" he asked. "I'm one person." "You are one junction," the second said. "One node in a network of unrealized routes. The more you refuse yourself, the more your maps skew. You're drawing from a reference that is no longer honest." He hated how much sense that made. "So what now?" he asked. The second lifted a hand made of static and hesitation. A sheet of paper formed in the air between them, slowly, like frost on glass. Another map, but this one was not covered in routes or labels or tidy phrases. It was blank. "The route you haven't dared to draw," the second said. "The one where you stop standing beside possibility and step into it." Idris stared at the page. "I don't know how to start." "You never do," the second said. "You're very good at pretending you require more data. It's your favorite excuse." A few clocks around them ticked in agreement. He took the page. It felt warm, like it had been waiting in a pocket next to a living body. His own, maybe, in another version. The pens in his jacket, ordinary bureaucratic tools, suddenly felt like instruments of sacrilege. "What if I draw the wrong future?" he asked. The second's form flickered with something that might have been amusement. "You've been living the wrong future," it said. "Anything you draw now is an improvement." He almost smiled, despite himself. He uncapped the pen. The smell of ink and paper flooded him with a sense memory, sitting as a child at a kitchen table, drawing impossible machines in the margins of his homework. Being told to stop daydreaming and get back to real work. He drew a line, not a word, not a symbol, just a line, starting in the middle of the page and slanting forward. The corridor vibrated. One by one, the cracks in the clocks sealed, the ticking smoothed out. The air lost its thickness, growing clean and bright, like a room after a storm. The second relaxed, its outline stabilizing. "There," it said softly. "Now time can proceed without tripping over your indecision." "That's all it took?" Idris asked. "That's all it ever takes," the second replied. A start. The corridor dimmed. He felt a pull, the gentle but insistent tug of his own timeline reclaiming him. The elevator doors he'd stepped through materialized behind him, suddenly part of the corridor as if they'd always been there. He turned to the second. "Will I see you again?" "You'll feel me," it said. "In every moment you hesitate too long. Try not to make a habit of it." He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. The numbers above the frame cycled sensibly this time, rising floor by floor instead of auditioning for an avant-garde art piece. When the doors opened, he was back on the 39th floor. Carpet, fluorescent lights, a window half trying to be a view. His office door stood where it should be. On his desk lay the same blank page. Only now it had a line on it. Nothing else had changed. And somehow, everything had. Idris folded the page carefully and tucked it back into his pocket. He did not feel resolved. He did not feel transformed. He felt like someone who had finally stopped waiting for Monday. Outside the building, traffic moved at the correct speed. Birds flew in real time. Mrs. Haynes from 3B would, for the first time in years, remember the present when asked how she was. Somewhere in the architecture of time, the second resumed its work, relieved to no longer be tethered to a man who insisted on hovering at the edge of his own life. And Idris Vale walked down the hallway toward his next appointment, quietly aware that for the first time since he'd taken the job, he did not entirely know where he himself was going, which, he thought, might be the point. You've crossed more than one threshold now. This is where people usually decide whether they're just watching or staying.